different. They were unbelievable, overwhelming, something that would make your jaw drop. Was there a Xlll-2 that could give him a focus like that? It might be impossible for a Xlll-2. Miracles were the domain of the goddess Xlll. The goddess opens up the door to those who never give up. The goddess opens the door to those who never give up. He muttered to himself. Then he was startled. His voice was so hoarse he barely recognized it. A reminder that he hadn't spoken with anyone since he'd left on this journey. He'd been walking on and on without ever saying a word. He hadn't even noticed what had become of his voice. I'm really alone, aren't I? Up until when he had left the village, there had been at least 2 of them. Once he was alone, he left on this journey. He hadn't wanted to stay there all by himself. He was too used to the place. If he stayed there, he wouldn't be able to keep from remembering all the others who had died, and the precious girl he'd lost at the very end. As long as he'd had her even remembering the others hadn't been so bad. By sharing their memories, they'd shared their sadness and loneliness. When they talked about the ones they'd lost, mysteriously, it had felt as if those people were with them. True death comes when everyone has forgotten you. As long as you live on in the memory of just one person, you will never die. He finally understood the meaning of what his grandmother had said. That was why the last 2 had brought them all up so many times. So that they wouldn't forget anyone. They had exhausted the topic, talking about how he did this. She had that habit, digging up the smallest of memories. The moment she had died and left him truly alone, remembering all those little things had become torture. The memory of her smile was like a claw ripping his chest apart. Unable to stand it, he'd fled the village. He'd been walking as if something were chasing him. No, he'd mostly be running. He'd run until he was out of breath, rest a bit, and then run some more, over and over, until the sun fell behind the horizon, and he would collapse on the spot and fall asleep. When he woke, he'd get up and run again. After a a few days of that, he was finally able to walk normally. Once he could walk, he slowly regained his calm and remembered something he'd once said. "Let's go look. I'm sure somewhere there are a whole bunch of people still alive." He'd completely forgotten what he'd said, because the memory brought with it things he didn't want to remember. He'd shut all his own words out of his head. He should have remembered this earlier. Somewhere there was someone who was still alive. The sadness and anger had nearly painted his heart black. But now a tiny glimmer was shining through. "Yeah, I'll go look." He'd always thought the mountains were just longer versions of the cliffs and slopes near the village, but he could see they were completely different now that he was approaching them from a distance. The surface of the mountains had looked smooth, but up close he saw their slopes were made of piles of boulders, each as wide as his own arm spread. No wonder nobody had ever tried to cross to the other side of the mountains. It was hard to walk when your feet were always sinking into the sandy ground. But climbing up the piles of rocks was even harder, and the climbing itself wasn't the only difficult thing. Some rocks would just about crumble when you braced your foot on them, and some would shift and wobble so much of your foot on them, and some would shift. Some rocks would just about crumble when you braced your foot on them, and some would shift and wobble. So much of the footing was poor, but that fact also gave him hope. Until now, he'd assumed that no one had ever come from the other side of the mountains, because nobody lived there. It had also been said that the land beyond was too close to the ocean for humans. But maybe that wasn't it, and nobody had ever tried to cross the mountains. It was a difficult path, difficult enough for him that he wouldn't have even considered it before he lost the last of his people. Of course, maybe there was no one on the other side, just as his grandmother and the other adults of the village had said. That was nothing but another possibility after all. No one had ever crossed the mountains to see, so he should see for himself. If there was even a sliver of hope, it was worth trying. He climbed up the difficult boulder-strewn ascent, walked along the slopes that were nearly perpendicular cliffs, and pulled himself up over more rocks. He was unused to walking on this, and the weather was fickle, so process was slow. Though he